let's talk about sandpaper. So if you're going to get into painting blasters, you're going to spend a lot of time with sandpaper. Now, there's a couple things you want to look for. First off, you want to look for the form factor. Is it a sheet? Is it a sponge? Sponges are easier to use, they're generally a little more expensive, and sometimes they can't get into the smallest of areas. I like to use a combination of both, but if you have to choose one or the other, I would go for just the sheets, because the sheets can do everything. The sponges are just nice because you have a big block to hold on to while you're sanding. Okay, the next thing you're going to want to look at is whether it's for dry or wet sanding. I do all dry sanding. Wet sandpaper can generally be used for dry sanding, but is a little more expensive. However, dry sanding paper cannot be used for wet sanding. Okay, it doesn't necessarily have to be hand sanding paper. As you can see, this is a pack of hand sanding paper. This little pack I have here is designed to go on the bottom of a machine sander, but it says for hand sanding. You can hand sand with any size paper. So what I like to do is to take a sheet and start tearing little pieces off of it, so that I have something small I can wrap around my fingers, good size to use. Okay, so the next thing we want to look at is the grit or grain. Okay, so this one's 150, this one is 200. It's a combo pack, 220 and 320. What that is a measurement of how rough the sandpaper is. Basically, think there's that many grains of sand on a specific size piece of sandpaper. So if there's 150 grains in this size piece versus 320, the 320 is going to be a lot smoother than the 150. You always start with the lower number and work your way to a higher number. Like this sponge goes all the way up to 600 on this side, and running your finger across it, it feels about as rough as a piece of notebook paper, but it actually does work. Okay, now let's talk about a couple things to do with sandpaper. This is a piece of 220, and we're going to use it for a very specific purpose, and you'll get to see how I use this. Obviously you want to use this to take off any logos you'd want to remove, any warnings you want to remove. You also want to give the entire blaster a once over to get a light chalky finish on the plastic before painting it. Now, prep definitely pays off. However, what happened here was a paint run. Happens to the best of us. I don't know of anybody that uses rattle can spray paint and doesn't eventually have paint runs. You can use a finer grit sandpaper to come in here, and I'm going to knock off that paint run to smooth this back out without going through, because this was prime black and then sprayed white over it. I don't want to go through the primer back to the light purple shell. So I'm just sanding off the area that's affected by the paint run. Didn't quite take off enough, so let's go up to a heavier grit. So this is a 150. As you can see, I don't have to work it nearly as much, and you want to kind of keep the heat down as much as possible. If you go really fast, the sandpaper will start getting hot on you, and that's one reason that you don't want to use like a rotary tool all the time on your blaster, because that heat will actually wind up melting the plastic and scarring it. Okay, so we've got the high spots off on that overspray. We're going to come in with our lower grit, smooth out the roughness that we just put on there with the heavier grit. And as you can see, I'm still not through the primer. I'm only taking off that top layer of paint. So we're going to get this sanded down smooth. And then lastly, we're going to take our sanding block here, which is a 400 grit on this side. Okay. Now, after sanding, there's always going to be stuff left over, little particles. You can see the chalky stuff on my hand. So before painting, I like to use 91% alcohol and a rag to get that off. I use alcohol instead of water because it dries extremely fast. Alcohol evaporates. A bottle this size is about $1 at your Mega Marts. I generally get this size for about $1.30. I pay the extra 30 cents and I just transfer it into the smaller bottle as I go. So I'm just going to clean off the affected area. We're going to let that dry. It's dry, and now we can go back and respray the area that had all that nasty overspray on it. Hope this guide helps.